Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Professor Edward Egros on the show. He is currently teaching statistics at Pepperdine University, and he is also a co-host on BetQL. Edward, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So this podcast is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. Edward, what is your biggest analytics and betting takeaway for the 2023 football season? Like what has been kind of your biggest insight?
So one thing that I've been fascinated by, and I want to put this elegantly using the Queen's English, why offenses suck so much this year. Okay. I have been absolutely fascinated trying to figure out what is causing all of these unders, maybe even why all of these favorites are winning, trying to figure out the better backup quarterbacks. And it's even something that we did on BetQL Daily on Wednesday was, okay, who are the most bettable backup quarterbacks? Like, I know every now and again, you're going to have an NFL season where you're trying to figure out, okay, there's just a bunch of injuries and whomever survives will win. But even this year, like someone like a Pat Mahomes, who for the most part has had everything that he's needed, some of his metrics are certainly fantastic, but in terms of overall offensive output and just record, there are reasons to fade the Chiefs. And so it's been fascinating as far as some of these key things that might be cyclical, like injuries, still not panning out in terms of figuring out why offenses have been so brutal. And there's some great investigations out there and analyses out there as far as like the fact that too high safety coverage rates, that's gone up in the NFL. So it's much harder to get explosive plays more now than, say, the last few years. Mention the injuries. Some of it is just that quarterbacks aren't playing very well, and that has something to do with it. And I think whenever I've tried to look into the data and uncover whatever I can find just watching games, I think one underrated aspect I do think we should talk about a little bit more. And yes, you and I are big believers in the passing game in terms of how predictive it is to winning games and championships and all that stuff. But I do think that the rushing games have also been quite bad. And I think it's something that we do need to have a serious conversation about. And I think to an extent we did during the offseason as to why all these running backs weren't getting paid, things like that. But even when I look at, say, rushing success rates on runs between the tackles this year per next gen stats, it's the worst it's been since 2019. And to me, if you can't run well between the tackles, then that can be a big problem as far as what your red zone offense can do. Also true that field goal kickers are having a banner year. And so basically getting conservative in the red zone, it's a lot safer to do that, a lot easier to do that. And if you know the opposing offense isn't going to score very much, then maybe you're more inclined to make these conservative decisions, even if they aren't the right ones. But what I find fascinating is that even when defenses are using light boxes, just 6 or fewer defenders in the box, and they're doing this at a higher rate this year. It's at roughly 44%. Normally it's around 40%. So we are seeing an increase there. But what we aren't seeing are running backs performing better against light boxes. They're averaging, 5 yards a carry against 6 or fewer defenders there. Normally it's around 5.1, 5.2. So it's only a slight drop off. But it's also something where I think when we're talking about why offenses in general are struggling, I don't think we talk about running games as much. And I don't think we talk about offensive line play as much as perhaps we should, both in terms of run blocking and about pass blocking as well, because we know when it comes to offensive lines, very much a weak link system. You find the player or players on any one particular side who are struggling a bit more, and you go after them, you attack them. And you look at draft classes the last few years, defense seems to be emphasizing a bit more. Pass rushers seem to be emphasizing a bit more. And so now that's sort of coming to fruition, so to speak, to where offensive line play is problematic, run games are problematic, and then you add all of that up with the quarterback injuries and bad quarterback play, you get the product that we've seen over these last few months.
Fascinating. Is there kind of a bettable conclusion that you've come to with this? Like, are you tending to lead towards unders or anything else, or is it kind of a team by team analysis?
It can be team by team, but I think also when I'm looking at, say, defenses that tend to employ light boxes a good bit more, if they're doing that, then I think it's more out of a confidence that they know they can contain just about anybody. And I think whenever you're looking at, key metrics and things like that, it's not just who's performing well, but who knows they can perform well. So even if, say, a run defense isn't elite, if they're still using light boxes at a higher rate, then they believe that they can contain just about any pass thrown their way. And yeah, they're willing to give up a few yards here and there. But I think philosophically speaking, there's something to be said for a defense that knows coming in what their strengths are and what they want to emphasize and what they hope to stop, to where their defense, ultimately is limiting points being scored on them. So I think whenever you're evaluating a defense, light box rate can be quite useful in terms of the teams that go to it a little bit more often. Maybe these are defenses you should be able to trust a little bit more because, look, you can tell a defense, hey, look, yeah, you're going up against an elite rushing attack. Well, then put a seventh defender in the box, put an eighth defender in the box. They can still do that. That's fine. It's when they don't do it because they know they don't have to. I think that is a big key sign in terms of trying to look for key unders, maybe even team totals for certain offenses going under those as well.
Is there an NFL team that kind of fits that description of playing a lot of light boxes because they feel like they can still stop the run or at least not get gashed too badly?
Yeah, certainly. And as I sort of pull up the key numbers here, as far as determining, which teams do that a good bit more compared with some of the others, but I think some of them are certainly the usual suspects when you're looking at overall tendencies there. The defenses that employ light boxes at the highest rate so far this year, you've got the Bills at 63%, the Titans at 62%, the Dolphins, 49ers, and Cardinals. Obviously, the narratives for each one of them can be different. But when you're looking at, say, the Bills, for instance, granted, the defense has a lot of injuries that they're dealing with, but it does point to the overall philosophy they have where you go, okay, we have no problem you trying to run on us. The key thing is to limit explosives. Make sure you're not ultimately scoring points. That's the idea, and I think that's fine. Titans, I think, is a really fascinating case study in terms of the pass defense kind of struggling a little bit. But if they're still using a light box, they're still trying to just get warm bodies back there. And they still feel like that their defensive line and linebackers can do more than enough to contain whatever is going their way. So that's interesting. I'd like to focus a little bit on the Dolphins here with a light box rate of 60% because I think this defense with Christian Wilkins and company, they're getting better. They are improving over time.
Sure.
And I think that's a trend that we usually see with a Vic Fangio defense, right? Like sometimes they do get off to slow starts, but especially when it comes to the Dolphins, it's getting better and better. And I know that sometimes people can get really selective when it comes to the time frame that they're looking at as far as this overall success. But even when you include like the Eagles game, the Chiefs game, things like that, they're still performing well against good quarterbacks and good offenses. And I think part of that is the secondary certainly getting healthier with Jalen Ramsey. That helps. And of course, this is a complex system where one thing affects the other. But I do think that the run defense, as that improves as well, that's also been a key focus and a key thing where you can tip your cap to the Dolphins. It has been impressive what they've been able to do on that side of the ball. And I look at what Miami is doing and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? There may be bad Tua Tyreek Hill performances in the future and they may happen in the playoffs. But if something else is going right for the Dolphins, they may still be able to win football games. Maybe it's not done the typical way we would expect from, a Mike McDaniel offense, but it has been impressive once this defense is coming together, what they've been capable of doing. And you're seeing that bear out with their light box rate.
Absolutely. Miami's one of those defenses that I just don't think is as bad as they were the first couple of games of the season. I mean, I think they were league worst in passing success rate. I expect them to at least get back to NFL average, if not better. I think Buffalo is another defense that you mentioned. I don't think it's necessarily because of the light boxes, but is also a defense that has looked bad. I expect them to be better. I think they still have enough talent on that side of the ball to at least not be a bottom five defense, which they have been. Edward, where are you getting this light box data?
Next gen stats.
Okay,
Next gen stats.
And that's publicly available on the NFL.com site?
That is not specifically what I'm looking at, but certainly things will come out, and from like the Next Gen Stats account and groups like that, as far as revealing key things.
Gotcha. Edward, is there a football bet that you would be willing to share your process behind?
Absolutely. The Jaguars-Browns game I find particularly intriguing on a variety of fronts. Currently on BetMGM, the Browns are 3-point favorites. It is juiced as a -3 with a total of 30.5. Boy, that's exciting, right? Like, this is what we watch football for. This is intriguing to me on a number of fronts because it almost feels like there are several steps to get to a key conclusion. And I could see a lot of people missing any one of these steps and then going down the wrong path. So you're choosing your own adventure and you're going to what you think is the sunshiny sidewalk. But in reality, things will block your path here. Not all backups are created equal, first and foremost. And I think this is something that, we need to talk about a great deal more about going forward, where, okay, just because you're a backup quarterback doesn't mean that you are necessarily better or worse than any other backup quarterback. These things don't necessarily cancel each other out. Tim Boyle was dropped by the Jets, right? So it's not like Tim Boyle is of the same caliber as Gardner Minshew or any other backup who could very well be leading their team into the playoffs. Like, there are plenty of, Jake Browning is another example. Turns out there is some talent there. I don't know if it's enough for the Bengals to make the playoffs, but I even believe in just a 1-game sample size or a 1.5-game sample size, he's shown us something for us to believe a little bit that the Browns can be in contention. The problem is the schedule for Cincinnati in terms of all these great defenses that can contain throws of less than 10 air yards. That is the problem more than anything else. But is Jake Browning a bad backup? I don't think so. So the first question is, okay, what do we think about all of these backup quarterbacks? Because Joe Flacco, much we may want to criticize, make fun of, all of that stuff, I think in the Browns system, especially with all the play action that he ran last week, I think there is something there. There is some reason for optimism, especially if you believe the Browns defense can sustain the success all the way to the end. I have my questions there just because of injuries and the natural variance of defense. But still, though, having Joe Flacco there, I don't think is the worst thing in the world as far as that's concerned. And when you look at the Jaguars side, yeah, there's a drop-off from Trevor Lawrence to CJ Beathard, but should it be as significant as, say, a touchdown? Trevor Lawrence has not had the best of years. And while he is fantastic when it comes to pocket manipulation, the offensive line in front of him does have some question marks. Like, Anton Harrison, I think, has been spectacular, but the rest of the O-line does have some weak spots. It goes back to what we said earlier, right? That offensive line play is a weak link system, and the Jaguars do have weak links that you could very well exploit, and you better believe that Cleveland should be able to do that. So that's certainly a big deal. Beathard in his last game, 12 of 14, or rather the season, Beathard 12 of 14, 77 yards. Really good completion percentage over expected, but a negative total EPA, so he can make some tough throws, but I just don't know in terms of overall consistency and avoiding key mistakes if that's going to last. And then the last element in all of this is the weather. It does seem like every single year, the Cleveland Browns at home have some bad weather game, whether it's just too windy or rainy or both, whatever. And maybe this is a quick sidebar here, but I've always wondered, like, not all games are created equal. How much should you discount a Browns home game when it is inclement weather? I mean, we talk about the 49ers losing streak earlier in the season, but one of those involved a bad weather game in Cleveland. So how much do you really want to hold it against the 49ers when knowing full well they've done fantastic things just about everywhere else, right? So not all games are created equal, but is this so different that you don't necessarily throw data away? That's not a good idea, but is there some way to kind of discount whatever happens in a contest like this? I suspect that they are going to run the football, both of them, the Jaguars and the Browns. Which rushing attack do I trust more? It would be Cleveland's. Even though it has taken a step back compared with the last few years, I still trust it a good bit more in terms of overall efficiency. And for that reason, backing the Browns as 3-point favorites, a juice 3, I think is okay. I like the under a good bit more. It may not be the most exciting of ball games, but I do think that there are enough reasons to be pessimistic that either offense can move the ball with consistency.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I still feel like there's a lot of question marks about the quarterback position. I feel like Trevor Lawrence could play. I know it looked kind of bad when he went down on Monday night, but he's still listed as questionable. And then, DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, could come back and play this game. I don't think it's 100% set that Flacco plays, right? And then there's the question of what's the drop-off, so on and so forth, right?
Right. And there are a lot of questions there. I mean, Flacco versus DTR and, Jacksonville. I am operating under the assumption that Trevor Lawrence doesn't play. I mean, the latest reports that I've seen is that he needs to sort of pick up the overall injury pace. It's not the right term, but basically he needs to show more than he has up to this point in terms of overall recovery for him to be out there. And I buy that. I mean, watching Monday Night Football, I didn't like what I saw. And so for that reason, I am leaning toward believing that Beathard and operating under the assumption that Beathard's going to be starting this game. So I think also, too, because it's a bad weather game, do you really want Lawrence out there? Not so much to get hit. I'm not expecting that because you can probably run the ball a good bit more. But I guess my question is more about, do you really want to risk it? Is it really worth risking Lawrence's health, given it's a short week and given that it may not matter? Passing attacks may not matter all that much if you're dealing with 20-mile-per-hour winds. You add all of these elements up, I think discretion is the better part of valor.
All right, so Edward likes under 30.5 total points in Jacksonville at Cleveland. Edward, we have some college football semifinal games. Michigan plays Florida State. Alabama. And Washington plays Texas. Do you have any initial thoughts on these games or these teams in general?
Well, I feel like the market sharpened a good bit between Michigan and Alabama. Going from Michigan -2.5 to -1, I think certainly makes a whole lot of sense. And so I think the line probably has sharpened enough to where I don't know if there's a play on the side there. But I do think, though, that there's reason to believe that Alabama can win this game outright and win yet another national championship. And part of it is what Michigan has and hasn't done late in the season. And I know this is something that Joel Klatt brought up that I thought was a really, really cool insight that explains why Michigan has run the ball so much. I mean, the notable example certainly was Michigan against Penn State in that second half, basically running the ball for, however many carries it was versus no pass attempts whatsoever. On the one hand, you go, okay, well, maybe it's because they're really good at running the ball and they're effective. So why don't you keep doing it until they stop you? Fair philosophy to have. But on the other hand, if McCarthy is passing the ball, how is the pass protection? And I think this is an underrated element as far as diagnosing this game, that Michigan's pass protection ranks 53rd per PFF. That's why they run the ball so much, because they cannot guarantee that McCarthy will stay upright, especially going up against Alabama's pass rushers, which rank 9th in America. That is going to be a bit of a mismatch. So if Alabama does get out to a lead, then I think that can spell some real trouble. So I think probably as far as live betting opportunities are concerned in this game, if Alabama does get out to a lead, I expect them to keep it. So that's one thing that I feel pretty good about. And I think also, too, with Alabama's offense, I know that, in the Iron Bowl, it didn't look very good, needing a 4th and goal from almost midfield and having to convert that. Certainly was a bad look. But the Georgia game was a great look. And other contests late in the season were great looks for Jalen Milroe and company, like Kentucky, like LSU, etc. His EPA numbers have steadily increased, and his pocket presence, I think, has improved over time. It's not just about scrambling and winning with design runs. I think Alabama's passing attack has improved over time. And so while we want to find the high leverage moments and say, okay, what is Alabama really doing? It can't just be about rushing and defense. I agree with that, but I do think the passing attack has gotten a good bit better to where I feel like even against this really stiff Michigan pass defense, they should be able to find theirs and potentially win this game. As for the Sugar Bowl, I know most models are going to say to back Texas here, especially with the creativity of Sark as play caller. But we did see better EPA per dropback numbers for Michael Penix than we did Quinn Ewers if you go to, say, cfb-graphs.com. And in some ways, I want to back this notion. I don't necessarily like the narrative that Washington plays up or plays down to their competition. I don't know how true that is. I think there are some upset alerts that Washington certainly saw that may have had less to do with just playing down or playing sloppily, but maybe they just skill-wise gave up a ton of points that they shouldn't have. But ultimately, I look at this and I say the Pac-12 is better, and I believe a tougher schedule can build character. What do they say? When you eat your vegetables, you get hair in your chest and all that stuff. That's what they tell kids these days, I suppose, or, back in the day, that's what they used to say. I do think a tougher schedule can put hair on your chest. And the Pac-12 was a great conference, and Washington won it. And regardless of how great or poorly they looked getting to that point, I do think that taking the points with the Huskies is the prudent play here.
Excellent. Couple thoughts on Washington. I think Michael Penix is good. I don't think he is quite as elite as I might have imagined coming into the season. But the thing about Washington is that their top 2 receivers are, I think, surefire first-round NFL draft picks. Ruma Dunze has had a fantastic season, and he's listed as a first-round pick pretty much anywhere you'll look. I actually think Jalen McMillan might be the better wide receiver. He was last year in terms of yards per route run. He was injured for a big part of this year. Look, Oregon couldn't stop either of them. And that's why one of the reasons why they lost that game. I think Washington is a team I just think they have a high ceiling. Do they play to that ceiling? Who knows? But, and yeah, are they 8-0 in 1-score games this year? Yada, yada, yada. Yeah. But I think it's an interesting handicap just because I think they have a high ceiling. I think the offense could really be fantastic. Although Texas defense has been great as well. And then getting back to Michigan, they actually did drop back to pass twice against Penn State in that second half.
Oh yeah, those are nullified, weren't they?
Yeah, one ended up being a pass interference, and the other one JJ decided to scramble. But yeah, absolutely right about Michigan's ability to pass protect and Chop Robinson really was they couldn't handle him in the first half, and I think that's part of that decision. And with Alabama, I think you bring up a good point that it's a different team than they were earlier in the year, and that their passing probably is a lot better, right? I mean, Jalen Milroe didn't even play against South Florida. When I look at season-long numbers for Alabama and Michigan, I make Michigan a pretty huge favorite. I forget exactly what it is, but maybe a touchdown. When I run the model that I actually use for my football predictions, it gives me a different answer. I actually have Alabama favored slightly, which means I have Alabama slightly rated higher. That tends to be a model that is maybe more accurately reflect the current state of the team. And the Alabama Auburn box score was one of the weirdest box scores I've ever seen, in that Alabama should have lost, but really beat them in terms of yards, success rate, actually had a positive turnover differential in that game. So they didn't really get dinged for that, even though they were one failure on 4th and goal from the 31 from actually having the SEC shut out of the college football playoff. So I think a lot of what I'm saying, completely matches what you're saying and what you see in these games. So any last thoughts on college football?
I guess one more as far as like the exercise of taking sides here, and that is this notion of how important data can be earlier in the season compared with what we have now. Because it's possible we get an Alabama-Texas rematch. And I do think if it does come to that, that Alabama will not be nearly as surprised when Texas goes for the deep ball. I mean, when I watched that game, I found it fascinating that Alabama just assumed. I mean, it's like what we see in the NFL all the time, right? Like divisional matchups, they turn into chess matches, right? You're doing something that's unexpected. We didn't see this before on film. Therefore, we weren't prepared for it. You had wrinkles that we didn't see, and that's much likelier to happen against familiar foes. And Alabama and Texas now understand each other to where Sark knew this, deep balls and scoring touchdowns that way when they really didn't before. That to me is really fascinating, but now Alabama can be better prepared for that. And so it's something where, what is it? Like, Nick Saban for the longest time was undefeated in rematches, whether it's in the conference or bowl games, whatever it is. That I think ended against Georgia in the national championship just a couple of years ago. But there's a reason why that trend existed. I think it's more of a truth than it is just a mere trend, because Alabama always has the personnel to make key adjustments. It's just a matter if everybody's on the right page and the decisions are sound. To me, I think Alabama is in a better position to make adjustments than, say, Texas is.
Yep, for sure. Edward, let's switch back over to the NFL. We have Buffalo going to Kansas City. Pretty big game, probably the two biggest Super Bowl favorites heading into the season. Hasn't really played out that way, especially for Buffalo. But how do you see this game playing out?
Well, of course, the market is always right. It's, maybe not always, but the fact that the number is shortened from 2.5 to 1.5 on BetMGM leads me to believe that somebody knows something. And that makes a whole lot of sense to me, because at some point I have to believe that the Bills will enjoy some positive regression. I just can't continuously believe that Josh Allen can play this well and the team perform this poorly in terms of the record. So that's one aspect to it that, just in terms of equilibrium, that I find fascinating. But something else too that, I kind of, mentioned this earlier, that when you're looking at Pat Mahomes, yeah, he's the best quarterback in football right now, no doubt about it. But this has been a really conservative offense. It's not just that everyone is watching Chiefs receivers drop footballs. It's that the coaching staff knows this. And so therefore they are adjusting to something where, okay, Mahomes doesn't air it out every single time. Like there may have been a moment with Tyreek Hill when they were doing that, but his ADOT Mahomes it's never been unbelievable. I would probably say, without looking at the data, Josh Allen probably has much longer average depth of target than Mahomes has, and that's consistent. Just because Allen likes to air it out, and having Stephon Diggs certainly helps that cause, all that. But it does seem to me like this conservatism in terms of throwing passes behind the line of scrimmage at a higher rate than what they normally do. That to me is a sign that they know that they are bereft of deep talent at wide receiver. And this is someone who loves Rashee Rice, who I think can develop into an outstanding wide receiver. But outside of him, outside of Travis Kelce, there are some real question marks there. So the conservatism makes me concerned in that if Buffalo gets out to a lead, can the Chiefs make some kind of a comeback? And what we've seen after a couple of these losses is maybe they're just not designed for that. Maybe they are designed to have a lead or a tie going into the second half, and then maybe they can start to put things together. Like that Raiders game, for instance, to me was more of an anomaly than it is what we've seen from the Chiefs this season. So that is a concern. Yes, they are going up against an injury-riddled Bills defense. Maybe taking the over makes sense, although I probably wouldn't go that far just because I think that, that number is fairly sharp. But the other side of the ball, I think, is just as, if not more intriguing. As much as I love this Chiefs pass defense, they're young, they're scrappy, well-coached, all that stuff. Now they're starting to succumb to the injury bug. Linebacker Drew Tranquill was evaluated for concussion. Safety Brian Cook has an ankle injury, which you really hate for him. Linebacker Nick Bolton, don't know what's going on with him. But it is something where now that they're starting to lose some pieces, and the fact that the Bills offense is going to get Dawson Knox back, to me, this is what the Bills have been wanting to do this whole time, is to operate more out of 12 personnel where they have both tight ends out there. They are emphasizing the running game just a little bit more, and that's great. But to have two tight ends on the field leads me to believe that it's all about maintaining success with the short game and using the middle of the field a good bit more. And I think against all of these, or given all of these injuries with the Chiefs defense, I do think using the middle of the field can be a good bit more effective for the Bills than it has been earlier this season, despite the fact that Josh Allen's had some great numbers. So I suspect this is a game where the Bills are going to utilize many more targets than they have before. They should be more effective, and I think the Bills can win this game.
Excellent. Are you interested in Buffalo plus 1.5 right now? How strongly do you feel you are? Okay.
I am. I think that can work out just fine. I do.
Excellent. You did mention Kansas City's defense. It has been excellent by my numbers, but you just kind of expected regression. Even without the injuries, I just don't feel like this is a top 5 unit in terms of talent, and we're seeing them come back to earth. And that's, in my mind, kind of been balanced by Kansas City's offense probably being better, or at least usually being better than they have been. You know, they do have Rashee Rice, who I think is awesome, and maybe next year develops into more of a deep threat. He's probably not there yet this year, so I still think it's a really good team. You do have to respect them as a Super Bowl favorite, but it sounds like you are more interested in maybe Buffalo getting the win here.
Absolutely. And not to say that the Chiefs can't make a run after this. The schedule does get way easier for them. And I will not count out Pat Mahomes for the most part when it comes to, say, the playoffs. You know, it's kind of funny. We were talking about this in the show earlier, where we are at this point where there's not one clear-cut MVP favorite. Right now, you look at the market, you've got 3 guys who are roughly neck and neck as favorites here with Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, Jalen Hurts. Pat Mahomes is not in that conversation. And we are seriously having a debate as to if Mahomes can be in this conversation just because the offense has been sputtering by their standards, at least. And that to me is just a fascinating case study that even though Pat Mahomes has time to make a case, we're not expecting him to do it.
Right. And wasn't Jalen Hurts the favorite like last week?
Right. Absolutely. Just because beat Buffalo, he's winning all of these close games. The rushing has been fantastic. The tush push has been a part of our lexicon for a little while now. Like all these things you can point to where, okay, he's the quarterback on the best team, or at least the team with the best record. So if you want to take that narrative, fine. I like Jalen Hurts as a quarterback. So, I mean, if he wins MVP, it's fine by me. But now we're starting to see Prescott play really, really well, especially against man coverage. Brock Purdy still number 1 in total EPA. At some point, that's undeniable. Maybe enough old school voters say, yeah, Purdy did, he is the quarterback for the best team, so you got to give him that. So we'll see.
We shall see. I really do love these markets that shift so rapidly. I think that is a telltale sign of value. I liked this year how FanDuel kept the Heisman market up during games, and you could watch Caleb Williams' stock fluctuate wildly against Notre Dame. I think I bought some like 35-1 at some point during that game, maybe at halftime, because it made sense at the time. I know it seems dumb now, but it made sense at the time because even they were going to lose the game, but they had everything ahead of them. They had 0 losses in the Pac-12, right? The numbers actually said the defense wasn't as atrocious as it actually turned out to be. So I do think that's like a telltale sign of value. And maybe the NFL MVP market is the next one I need to dig into.
We succumb to recency bias all the time in so many different walks of life. And I think specifically when we're talking about the MVP market, it's really easy to do. I think it's gotten a good bit sharper over these last couple of weeks because the comparison with the NFC to the AFC is such to where the AFC playoff picture is a mess right now. I think there is a strong case to be made for the Dolphins to get the 1 seed. And while we were, talking up the defense, and certainly the offense is the highest ceiling of any offense in football right now, can they put it all together? Maybe, but I'm not just confident that this will occur. The Ravens, have offensive question marks. We talked about the Chiefs before. Like, there's no real clear-cut, confident team we can point to in the NFC. Meanwhile, the NFC, it's top-heavy. Like, we know who the best 3 teams are, and there's no question who they are. It's just a matter of, which quarterback we like the most. And so in that regard, it's a lot easier to get to that point, but to actually have found value, you needed to have concluded that a long time ago. And that also included taking Jared Goff and the Lions out of that mix. Maybe not so much the bad performance over Thanksgiving, but at least acknowledging the fact that the Lions are not as good as these top 3 teams.
Just so we're clear, who are your top 3 teams in the NFC?
Eagles, 49ers, Cowboys.
Cowboys. Yeah. I mean, we were so down on the Cowboys not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
They were out.
And it was just one game against the 40. Like, maybe they just can't play the 49ers very well, but they can beat up on everybody else. And maybe that's just the conclusion we're supposed to have. Like, that Eagles game was very close. They're favorites at home on Sunday. I like Dallas to cover that number, and they play very well against them. It's just the 49ers have their number for whatever reason. I think we probably overrate those playoff games a little too much.
Sure.
Just random bad things happen in those contests for Dallas, whether it was time mismanagement or bad injury, whatever it is. And I don't want to overemphasize those performances when there's so many other games we can point to, especially with Dak playing well and this defense playing really well, where I go, yeah, the Cowboys are one of the top 3 teams in the NFC. And if you don't believe that, then you're probably looking at the wrong information.
Professor Edward Egros, thank you so much for joining me on this show. Please let everyone know where they can find you and all of your good work.
Absolutely. So BetQL Daily is on twitch.tv/BetQL. We're also on YouTube. You can also follow me at EdWithSports on X and on Instagram, where I showcase key links and key clips from the show and all my other various and sundry activities. And so at EdWithSports on the socials. And also make sure to check out BetQL Daily on YouTube and some radio stations across the country, and also on Twitch. And that is from 6 to 9 a.m. Pacific, 9 to noon Eastern.
And you have cfbgraphs.com, right? With all your EPA numbers?
Parker's site. Yeah.
Oh, you're not helping him with that anymore?
Take a back seat since he's got everything under control. So
excellent. Edward, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.